Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Barry, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here with the Bruges Group. I was saying to Barry earlier, I was apologising that I don't support the events in London, perhaps as much as I might, but of course I'm based in the Midlands and I tend to be flying over London rather than coming through it. But it is a particular pleasure to be here tonight. Can I also thank Mark for his extremely kind comments? Much appreciated, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. And can I, in return, say how much I respect you and the handful of other Conservative MPs who take a similar line on these issues. I appreciate what a tough furrow you have to plough, and I admire you for doing it. So thank you very much indeed. I was going to start out by telling you a little anecdote. People often say to me after my 12 or now nearly 13 years in the European Parliament, they say, what are your proudest achievements, or what are you happiest at having done? It's always a difficult question for a politician, and one of the things that I like to respond with in my self-deprecating way is to say that I'm very proud of the achievements of some of the members of staff who have worked for me at various times. Now, one of those members of staff was a young lady called Sally McNamara. I'll never forget going to a Conservative event when I was still a candidate back in probably December 98, and looking around the room, and in those days I was younger than I am now, of course, and I was just about the youngest person at this Conservative function, apart from a couple of girls aged about 20. And being the sort of chap I am, I couldn't help my eyes lighting briefly on the couple of girls aged about 20, and one of them came bouncing across, full of confidence, and said, "You're the candidate, aren't you, Mr. Helmer? I'd like to be your press officer." And I thought to myself, well, she qualifies on at least one of the criteria for a press officer. She seems to have plenty of self-confidence. To cut a long story short, she served as press officer for the team and then for myself and Chris Heaton-Harris for about 3 years. Then she came across the staffer in my office for a couple of years. After 5 years working in or with the European Parliament, she felt reasonably enough that she'd done enough of that, and asked if I would assist her to go to the States. And she was hired when she was in the States by the Heritage Foundation. She worked with them for a period of time, and just about a year or so ago, she was hired from Heritage by Raytheon, the American defense contractor, and she now works with them in government relations and corporate affairs. In addition to all that, she actually found time to take an external degree while she was in the States just recently, and she sent me an email about it this morning. And she was very proud of the fact that she got, whatever they call it over there, straight A's or whatever. She got a very good result on her thesis, which she put in some months ago, but had finally come through the system. And the thesis was about why the euro cannot succeed. And I was particularly struck by this example of a student's thesis being vindicated by events between the time that she put it in for marking and the time it came out with the straight A's. Because realistically, when we look at it now, the euro, it's not a question of if it will fail and whether it might fail. It is failing before our very eyes. We watch the news through the day, and as the days go by, it is just extraordinary. And by the way, there was a time, a few years ago, when on the doorstep people would say, well, I sort of agree with you about Europe, I don't like it very much, but it's a long way away and it doesn't affect me. Nobody is saying that anymore. We've had this slow-motion coach crash of a euro crisis that seems to have become a sort of television soap opera. It's been on the television, it seems to me, virtually every night for the last 3 years, and every time they cook up the next solution that is going to blow the skeptics out of the water and re-establish the credibility of the currency, it usually lasts about 3 weeks, 4 if you're lucky, and then it's all breaking up again. And now, even people like Christine Lagarde are saying that we need to plan for an orderly exit of Greece from the euro. And there are some people who believe that when Greece goes, that will be it, and everything will be hunky-dory again. Of course, if you'd read Jeremy Warner in the Telegraph today, and if you happen to agree with him, you would certainly know that it won't be hunky-dory, and of course the markets will turn their attention to other countries. Now, we ought to listen, however, to the advice of Mr. Nick Clegg. I do have some knowledge of Nick Clegg because he was elected as a member of the European Parliament in the East Midlands region, as I was in 1999. and we served side by side in the same region for 5 years. Nick Clegg has advised skeptics, and I assume there are one or two skeptics in this room, has advised skeptics that we should not gloat. Well, of course he's right, isn't he? Schadenfreude is a horrible thing. But when you have been vilified and ridiculed and told you were stupid and old-fashioned and nostalgic and a little Englander, and you didn't understand the future, you didn't understand the way things were going, you were putting your country in jeopardy by failing to join the wave of the 21st century, when you've been told all those things, and then finally you are utterly, overwhelmingly and gloriously vindicated by the facts, surely you are entitled. Surely you are entitled to a little quiet satisfaction, even as you admit that, as Marcus said, there is a financial storm coming and we need, and you're absolutely right, Mark, we need to batten down the hatches. The task of government is to prepare for that storm, which is certainly coming if it is not already with us. But there are those like Alistair Darling, like George Osborne. By the way, I think I saw George Osborne today in the business lounge at the Eurostar terminal in Brussels. I don't know what he was doing out there, but there he was. And indeed David Cameron, many other people have said it's very important for Britain that the euro should survive and succeed because of the damage that it will do if not. Now, as Mark has already pointed out, of course, it is not in our gift to make the euro survive. We can pour good money after bad. We can give £11 billion, or whatever the latest figure is, to the IMF to funnel through to the eurozone in a sort of pretense that we're not bailing out the euro. We can do all those things. What we cannot do is ensure the survival of the euro, because it is doomed for all the reasons that we have been explaining for the last 10 or 15 years. It cannot survive. So the question I have is this: why do they ask us to go and effectively die in the trenches, struggling to defend the indefensible, when the truth is that at the end of the day, Europe can only survive if it sorts out this mess. And it can only sort out the mess, in my view, by largely dismantling the euro. It could be that a currency union between Germany and Austria could be extremely successful. And if they want to do that, I'm not the one to stand in their way. But a currency union that includes Northern Europe based on Germany and the Club Med countries simply cannot be made sense of. And if Greece goes, there will be others standing in line who will go as well. Now, I don't want to anticipate what Hjortur is going to tell us later on, but of course there is the example of Iceland, which after devaluing and having gone through the most appalling crisis, is now really recovering rather well. And there is the earlier example of Britain, which was struggling in the exchange rate mechanism, we all know, and Black Wednesday became Golden Wednesday, and the recovery started virtually from the day we left. The truth is for Greece, that if they stay in the single currency, and if German taxpayers are prepared to bail them out indefinitely, I don't think it's going to happen, but if it were to happen, then Greece would suffer from grinding deflation and poverty and probably even hunger for decades, if not forever, whereas if and when they leave, they will face the most appalling financial storm and they will need food parcels from Brussels and Berlin. But in a year or 2 years or 3 years, the recovery will start for Greece. And suddenly their exports of olive oil and ouzo and Aegean cruises will be priced back into international markets. And I wonder sometimes, isn't that what Brussels is afraid of? It's afraid of Britain leaving, because when Britain leaves, we will show what we can do without the dead weight of Brussels regulation. If Greece leaves and then does an Iceland, good heavens, what an example that will set for the rest of Europe. Now, when I moved from the Conservative Party to UKIP, one of the biggest changes I noticed was this: that my views on subjects like, on the one hand, Europe, and on the other hand, climate and energy, which had been an embarrassment to the Conservative Party, although I will say one or two of my MEP Conservative colleagues actually secretly agreed with me, or privately agreed with me. Suddenly in UKIP, the views that had been an embarrassment in my previous roles became party policy. And I think it was on about day 2 that Nigel Farage said to me that he would like me to be the party spokesman on industry and energy, which of course I was delighted to do. Now, my colleagues have spoken about the economic storm we're facing and the euro, and I dare say Giorgio will mention that again. I thought I would just touch on this issue of energy because we in Britain face an energy crisis made in Brussels, which is really very, very serious and severe indeed. If any of you have got wind farms in your back garden, you will, or close to your back garden, you will know why local people object to them. And they have very sound reasons. You can call it NIMBYism if you like, but the damage that local wind farms do to local communities is well documented. But the attempt to provide 30% of Britain's generating capacity from wind, which the government is engaged upon at the moment, is not just a local issue for local people who find a wind farm on the doorstep. This is a national issue that is creating an energy disaster, an energy crisis in our country to go along with the other crises that we're facing. And of course we're doing it because we have been told to do it by Brussels. That is the reason for it. To start with, there is the impact on the consumer, and we have seen dramatic increases in energy prices, some of those caused admittedly by global energy markets, but much of it caused by the extraordinary subsidies that we're giving for renewables. I have a confession to make. I put in a domestic solar photovoltaic unit in my home, not because I believe in renewables, but because of the outrageous subsidies that have been offered. It costs about 4p to make a unit of electricity in a sensible power station. It costs about 11 or 12p for you and me to buy a unit of electricity from the grid. The subsidy pays me 50p a unit for generating it off the roof. It is absolute lunacy. And the costs of those crazy subsidies are passed directly on to the rest of us. So that consumers find themselves paying more. Pensioners are forced into fuel poverty, forced to the choice between heating and eating. And we have reached a level where I think 1 million more families have been forced into fuel poverty, households have been forced into fuel poverty just by the effects of renewable subsidies. But if that is the impact on consumers, what about the impact on industry? We are giving British, and to an extent European, because they're doing similar things on the continent, we are giving ourselves the highest electricity prices, in effect, in the world, apart from a few islands where it's very expensive to generate. And we face global competition. We're looking out across the Atlantic to America, where they have had a shale gas revolution, and the price of gas has practically halved in America, and America is looking forward to a new industrial renaissance based on cheap, indigenous fossil fuel energy. That's America. But what about India and China? Some of the Greens will tell you that China is progressing with green technology. What they don't tell you is that China is building a new coal-fired power station every week, and that India is not far behind. So we're going to have America with cheap shale gas, we're going to have China and India with cheap coal, cheap electricity from coal, and what are we going to have? We are going to have expensive electricity from intermittent renewables. It gets worse than that. Because if you are going to have a high proportion of your electricity from intermittent, unpredictable wind, you have to build backup, usually gas backup, to support it. And if you don't build the backup and the wind stops, guess what? Suddenly the lights don't go on anymore. And if you ask people in depth, as they now call it, well, what about backup? They say we've got lots of gas and that's very flexible. You know, we can kind of flex that in. No, they can't. We've got nuclear power stations closing because they've reached the end of their lives. We've got coal-fired power stations closing courtesy of Brussels, the European Union's large combustion plant directive. Perfectly good coal-fired power stations that could run for years or decades are being closed simply because Brussels told us to. Kingsnorth in Kent on Nigel Farage's patch was closed about 6 weeks ago with a loss of 100 and some jobs. That is what we are doing, and we are doing it because Brussels has told us, and we are not building the new backup we would need for the wind that we think we're going to build. There's a question whether we're actually going to be able to build the wind at all. But if we build the wind, we need the backup. We're not going to have it. And also, if you're going to have to build the backup at something like 100% of the planned wind capacity, the question arises, why not just build the gas and not build the wind? There is just no sense in it, especially as gas run intermittently as backup for wind is much less efficient and more expensive on a per unit basis than gas run in a proper continuous process gas-fired power station. And there have been a couple of reports recently suggesting that the total emissions of the system wind plus gas are actually not that much different from the emissions of the gas by itself. So we have these huge costs, the huge local impact, the need for backup, which we're not providing, but even if we do all those things and spend all that money, we're not actually saving much on the CO2 emissions anyway. I had the privilege and pleasure of spending some time in the European Parliament's Industry Committee recently. I worked for many years slaving away in the vineyard of the European Union's Unemployment Committee, and I won't start telling you about that, but there are some terrible stories coming out of it. I've now moved, because I'm speaking on industry and energy, to the Industry and Energy Committee, and we had Commissioner Tajani, who, so far as I can remember, is the Industry Commissioner, but correct me if I'm wrong. The thing that distressed me was his ideas for growth. The European Union has suddenly become aware of the need for growth, perhaps because of the elections in France and Greece and one or two other places. So they're starting to talk about growth. Growth is the flavour of the week in the European institutions. He's got some wonderful ideas. Well, he's got two wonderful ideas. One of his ideas is to spend more money. The other idea, which also involves spending more money, is going to have a space program. A space program that's going to put Europe back on top. Wonderful, isn't it? So we'll have a sort of pale imitation of the American space program and the Russian space program and the Indian space program and the Chinese space program, and that is supposed to restore European competitiveness and growth. I had a real go at him, and if I may, Barry, just put in a quick commercial. The 90 seconds of the quick go I had at him is on my blog, and you are welcome to watch it if you wish. But there are three things that Europe would need to do to achieve growth, and they're fairly simple things. The first thing they would need to do is massive deregulation to take away the costs of European regulation that are piled onto businesses. The second thing, and I've discussed this a little bit, is to end the farce of the euro currency, which is destroying European economies, especially in southern Europe. And the third thing they need to do is to get away from these climate policies, which are unworkable and add enormous costs to European industry. So those are the things they need to do. They simply have no idea that they need to do them, and they're not going to do them, and that is yet another reason why we should be better off out. I have a confession to make. I was born as long ago as 1944. At that time, we were at war. There was another German attempt to take over Europe going on at the time. But I was born in a free and independent nation. I believe that this country has the ability and the right and the duty and the manifest destiny to govern itself in a free, independent and democratic country. And do you know what? The way things are going just now, I think I might just be able to die in a free and independent country. Thank you.